Good afternoon. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and passionate advocates for our environment. Welcome to another day of SGI Talks. Today we're talking about the youth. I am Shari Al-Saud. I'm a co-founding member of the Environment Development Association, FASIL, a youth-led organization focusing on environmental sustainability. I'll be your host for this session today, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce my colleagues here. Uthman Al-Muammar, the chair of Y20 Saudi Arabia, Najat Al-Hashim, Environment and Sustainability graduate, and Anwar Qasim, a fellow in Climate and Sustainability at CAPSARC. Our topic today is the outlook on Saudi youth green ambitions. Please.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to start with Najat with a question. Najat, you are a volunteer at a non-profit organization focusing on environment and sustainability. Can you tell us a little bit more about volunteering and its connection to motivating Saudi youth in actively engaging in sustainability practices and issues?
Yeah, so currently I'm volunteering with the Saudi Arabian Botanical Society, and in the society I work on different environmental initiatives and different environmental projects that they're hoping to complete within the following years. It is very beneficial for one to enter into the volunteering field or try to volunteer if they're interested in the environmental sector, because in the sector itself, you should think of more of your intrinsic values rather than your extrinsic values. Meaning that you should think about giving more to the environment, to the society, and less thinking about more towards what benefits you only. So volunteering helps aids in that.
Amazing. My perception as a person who is also involved in non-profit activities and volunteering really stands on the values of collaboration and active impact. And sometimes there are challenges for knowing the proper channels where youth can contribute with like-minded individuals in the decision-making, especially in the energy sector and the climate action sector. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, Anwar?
Okay, so in terms of channels for youth to collaborate, I think if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have had very little to say. But over the last few years, a number of groups, youth groups, circles, and organizations have started to spring up. For example, there's the Saudi Youth Climate Network, with its goals to raise awareness, share knowledge, and really build the community around climate issues. There's also the Saudi Youth for Sustainability, a youth-led organization that started at KAUST. Now, I'm actually a KAUST graduate. I got my master's at KAUST about 11 years ago. Back then, there were no sustainability groups at KAUST. The level of awareness wasn't quite there. So this group at KAUST was established about a couple of years ago, I believe in 2019. And they've got a nice mission as well to help launch similar groups in universities for students, sustainability groups for students across all Saudi universities. And of course, they're looking to bring these people together, get them to network, get these like-minded individuals in the same room, to learn from each other, to share knowledge, and to look for opportunities in the area. Now, I have to also speak about SGI. So I'm a member of SGI, the Saudi Energy Leaders Assembly. So SGI is a platform. Unlike the others, it focuses on young Saudi professionals, mainly in the energy ecosystem. And the idea here is to bring these professionals from the different sectors. So you're talking about the government sector, so those, for example, in the Ministry of Energy, the think tanks like CAPSARC, where I work, people like myself, and of course, people from businesses in the energy ecosystem, companies like SABIC and Saudi Aramco that are at the forefront of corporate sustainability. So the goal of SGI, the platform, is really to bring these people together, again, share knowledge, put those like-minded individuals in the same room, get alignment between all the sustainability actions, our climate actions that are happening across the public and private and civil society sectors, and of course, to prepare these people to be leaders in the future and to be the ones taking those decisions to tackle climate change.
So this is really about engaging the youth with the decision makers and businesses within the area. It's not only a bottom-up approach. It's more of an interactive approach between the youth and the decision makers or policy influencers within the country. Since we're talking about decision making and policies, and we would like to reflect to how can Saudi youth and the youth in general contribute to global policy making and advocacy, especially in platforms like the G20 process or the UN process in general. Uthman, you are the chair of the Y20. Can you let us know what Y20 does and how can the youth contribute to global decision making and policy design and advocacy?
Thank you, Mshari, and hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. So in terms of the engagement on a global front, I work a lot with young people in general. But in the past 4 to 5 years, I've been chairing the Youth 20 engagement group in the kingdom. So in 2020, Saudi Arabia hosted the G20 for the first time. And the Y20 was born out of that. And the Y20 essentially is the engagement group related to youth. It's an official platform within the G20 in which single year, the young people from G20 countries get together and they form a set of policies. This policy is named a communique, which is a fancy word for saying literally a document that includes policies in it that these young people have come up and put together. And since 2020 until today, every single year there's always a theme of sustainability, whether it's climate action, SDGs, and so on. And so this is quite an important topic as youth from all over the world get together. And they're usually very heated discussions because you get youth from developing countries, you get youth from developed countries, from different perspectives on how energy should be utilized and how sustainability could be done. And so these platforms are extremely important, and in particular the Y20, because it's really close to decision makers. Let's say that in 1 year, one policy is then adopted by the G20. That's a huge deal. And so these young people meet on a yearly basis, and it depends on where the G20 is hosted. When it comes to the UN, there's of course the ECOSOC Youth Forum. There is upcoming now, actually this year, the Future Summit, and this is actually next year. And this is an important summit where young people are actually involved to come up with policies that relate to them. And there's also something called the Pact of the Future, which will be signed by member countries as well. So all of these come together to really create avenues for young people to be involved in. Now in Saudi, we usually take delegations every year to the ECOSOC Youth Forum to literally talk about SDGs and what's been happening on the Saudi front. And so this year I was fortunate enough to lead the delegation to the ECOSOC Youth Forum, where two young Saudis actually talked about what is Saudi achieving when it comes to water, what is Saudi achieving when it comes to digital inclusion. So all of that are important platforms.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on the different experiences between the G20 being hosted in Saudi Arabia and the engagement of the Saudi youth in that space during that time versus the G20 moving on to be hosted in other countries and the level of engagement of youth in these?
So in 2019, we were, of course, informed that we're going to be hosting the G20. What we didn't know was that COVID was happening next year. And so we were quite surprised. And so originally we had a full plan to bring in about 77 delegates to the kingdom. And what we've noticed is that as 2020 progressed, that plan was essentially a moot point. Nobody's going to travel. And what happened actually was that we developed 3 sets of policies, or let's say documents, that haven't been developed before in the Y20's history. And the Y20 essentially has been running for 10 years since then. So during our presidency was the 10-year anniversary of the Y20. And what the delegates came together and they decided, hey, let's actually do a document that talks about the short-term, medium-term, and long-term effects of COVID. And of course, there were policies that relate to sustainability. In addition, during that year, I think it was the first, if I'm not mistaken, the year where the G20 leaders actually met twice. First in March to talk about the pandemic itself, and then later on in the year, which is the usual time that the G20 leaders meet. And so that year was a particularly difficult year for everybody involved, but more so for young people as well, because their whole lives have been upended. And for many young people, when we're talking about challenges, they tend to work in areas that are very much vulnerable. They're the first to be laid off, for example, due to their lower year of experiences. So young people were really invested into the Y20, and sustainability was a major topic of discussion.
Amazing. Now we are at the global stage and discussion. And one of the main engines to drive global sustainability and sustainable development is the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yep.
And I think we have an interesting story, Uthman, before going to my colleagues here. Can you bring us back to Saudi and tell us the story of the Sustainable Development Goal, how Saudi is moving the needle with that, and how the youth contribute to the Sustainable Development goals in Saudi?
Sure. So the first, I think, way that Saudi Arabia has really addressed this issue was to talk really about governance. So when you're talking about Saudi, you're talking about more than 10 ministries, a lot of government organizations. And the issue is, how do you bring all of their voices together? And so I work very closely with the SDGs team in the Ministry of Economy and Planning. And what they've done in 2 years ago was to really create this SDSC, the Sustainable Development Steering Committee. And this steering committee includes about 20 plus government entities and includes with it 11 working groups. And each of these working groups focus on specific aspect of the SDGs. And so they come in together in order to make sure that the policies that are being developed actually include the voices of these different ministries. So nobody really creates their own tone of music, and it actually becomes a symphony. And most recently, actually this year, we did the Voluntary National Reviews, which is a document that highlights what Saudi Arabia is doing on a national front. And we've showcased that during the high-level political forum. And it includes the progress and also talks about the governance in particular when it comes to this. And I think that could be a success story to really bring in all of these government entities in one place and having them actually be part of the creation of the policies that advance the SDG in the kingdom.
Amazing. SDGs are wide. It covers things like education, climate action, and many things that aims to realize the three strategic pillars of the sustainable development goals of sustainable development, which is economy, environment, and society. And on education, I would like to ask our recent graduate here, Najat, about her experience in the educational system of Saudi Arabia, and how our educational institutions and programs in Saudi Arabia are fostering that culture of sustainability and engagement of students in environmental advocacy and initiatives.
Yeah. So currently we're seeing more and more educational institutions like universities releasing bachelors in environmental programs and masters as well. So I was actually the first batch from my university in environmental and sustainability, and I only had my other friend, Noura. She also graduated with me, so we were only two, but I'm looking at the batches below us, and the numbers are getting higher and higher, so more youth are interested in going into the environmental and sustainability. Also, as well, other institutions like non-profit organizations that have different programs, like the Saudi Botanical Society. It has 2 programs right now, where the Batila program works on educating young children, fostering a sense of sustainability consciousness, and planting trees and educating about how we can help our environment. And the Nawadid program for the Botanical Society focuses on training fresh graduates into the field of botany and integrating them into the Saudi field of botany. So.
If I can just add to that
Please.
point, with regards to NGOs and universities, so at CAPSARC, we're a think tank, we actually collaborated with KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, where we ran some courses focused on teaching sustainability. So one of those courses was called Sustainability, From Principles to Practice, and this was focused on young professionals, not necessarily in sustainability fields, but really to equip them with the basic principles of sustainability and some of the actions that they can take. And a course that I also really liked was a very recent one that we also ran, which focused on high school students. And it got top high school students from 14 cities across Saudi Arabia to teach them about the policy-making process. Now, this is so important because when it comes to climate change, one of the key levers that we can use is obviously climate policy. And this really taught the students all about how policy is designed, how to evaluate policy, and how to implement policy. And those are skills that these students can take in the future and forge careers in those areas.
I think, and reflecting on that, I think we hosted a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, the MENA Climate Week in Saudi. And I've honestly seen some platforms that mimics the, for example, UN negotiations or something like that when it comes to climate action. And like high school students, middle school students, university students were involved in these discussions to understand and realize the context and the dimensions of decision making at the global arena, especially when it comes to climate action. And this really requires a certain level of awareness. I think all of these activities are meant to enhance and elevate the level of awareness in the youth, in the society in general. But awareness for me is usually something that needs to be defined, something that needs to be impactful. We need to maintain awareness. So I would like to give the floor to any one of you who wanted to reflect on the awareness building element.
So if I can start, I love that you mentioned the definition of awareness because it can have different definitions. So we do a lot of research at CAPSARC, and I've looked at studies that have tried to measure awareness. And you can have a narrow definition of awareness, where it's just a sense or a concern about climate change, or you can have a broader definition of awareness, which includes the knowledge to understand what are the causes of climate change, what are the effects of climate change, and what are some of the actions that can be done to tackle or mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. So you can have a narrow or a broader definition. Now, going back to awareness, it's absolutely important because for me, awareness is the first step. It's the prerequisite. If the youth are aware about the issues, and if they have the knowledge about these issues, then they're going to be engaged. And if they're engaged, then you're going to get the actions. And I'll give you an example of a study that I recently came across and we've actually discussed.
Yeah.
They looked at measuring the level of awareness of high school students in Germany and Austria, their environmental and climate change awareness. And they found that about half of high school students were highly aware about climate change issues. And that's quite a good number. Probably
That study was in Saudi or?
no, this was for students in Germany and Austria.
Germany, okay.
In Germany and Austria. And what I liked was that they found a link between the level of awareness and whether those students chose to adopt a climate-friendly diet. So that was an example of how awareness leads to action. And that's why awareness is so important for the youth.
Leads to action and behavioral shifts as well.
Exactly.
And when it comes to behavioral shifts, we really need to understand the social structure and dynamics
Right.
for our target community that we're trying to provide these interventions and shift any certain behaviors. And this element of understanding a certain societal structure in order for us to design and develop the proper interventions.
I can chip in on this as well. I think when we're talking about awareness, I think we have to level the playing field. So the challenges are right now is that for you to be aware of engagement on the sustainability or climate action, everybody has a specific way of doing it. And there is no set way of going about it. And so for us in the kingdom, one of the things that our delegates were pushing for during the Y20 is actually including it into the curriculums on a national level. And all the other delegations were on board with that as well. And I think it needs to start as early as that in order for it to really, let's say, take or catalyze moving forward into action later on. And that's, awareness from the youth is one part, but also having the avenues in which that awareness could be then taken to action by decision making. And we see that now happening in the kingdom more and more. There's also the community aspect, which Anwar spoke about. But I think communities could also be beyond the universities, not necessarily only within universities per se, but also on the workplace. And we see a lot of push towards that as well within social media now too.
So from, you said from action, from awareness to action.
Yes.
What are the key tools that we need to have in order to translate awareness into action? And that could be simply meant by what does sustainability means to you on your own way, and how do you practice sustainability on your daily life?
Yeah. So I've worked on a study in 2018. So for me, tools in this case means skills, right? Okay. So in 2018, we tried to predict or signal or forecast into the future. What are the skills, the top 5 skills that young people will need? And we worked with the Institute for the Future. I was at MISC Foundation at the time. And we went to 6 cities in the world, and we called those cities cities of transition, or cities essentially that are facing a huge change for young people to deal with. And we went and interviewed a lot of the young people within those cities. And so we went to Chongqing, China, we went to Mexico City, Mexico, we went to Austin, Texas. So we didn't go to like the New Yorks of the world, you know? And essentially what was really interesting was that we came up with spectrums of skills, and they fall under 5 key categories. The first was managing your own presence, or making sure that you understand yourself. And this dealt a lot with actually having your own identity and how can you reflect that to a digital presence, which led to the second skill set, which is about digital intelligence. And as we see now, of course, back then we didn't predict that COVID would happen and everybody would be dealing with online meetings all the time, and we don't have a threshold to understand when our day would end and when the work day would end, and then when we would have post-work activities. But essentially, digital intelligence was a key element of that, and especially now with AI. This is a key point too. The third area was social intelligence, and we've seen, especially in the kingdom, where it's one of the fastest changing countries in the world, we're moving a lot to projectized work, where people come in together to work on a project and then dissipating. And we see the time frame between those projects really reducing. So instead of you working on a project for 6 months, now you work for 3 months with different teams. And then the fourth skill was managing complexity. And the fifth skill is where really sustainability kicks in, and that's around feasibility. Trying to understand resilience and how can you face the challenges? How can you learn to fail? And resilience comes in many ways, and we see that a lot with sustainability, where a lot of the young people, specifically in these developing countries, face challenges when it comes to droughts, when it comes to flooding, and etc. So how can you bounce back from these challenges? And I think these are important tools for you to pick up and to bounce back.
Amazing. Anwar, Najat, what are your takes on, your perspectives on when it comes to challenges? What are the key challenges that the youth are facing in order for them to be proactive and engage with climate action?
So one of the main challenges that I faced within my study and when I started working is that there isn't enough resources in the sense of research, and when there are projects, there are ambitious projects, but there's not enough funding for the ambitious projects. So limited resources in the kingdom is one of the main challenges, as well as trying to switch the societal view of environment and sustainability within the kingdom. I feel that is one of the biggest challenges we have right now.
Lack of resources and challenges around that. Anwar, do you have any
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to awareness because I still think, although the level of awareness has clearly risen in Saudi Arabia, I would love to see even more efforts there to raise awareness. And I think even seeing studies, going back to your point, that track this indicator. So surveys, regular periodic surveys that track the level of awareness, the knowledge, and the knowledge gaps that the youth might have to know where you need to create improvements in education. So I think awareness is very important. I think also some kind of guidance or mentoring, because climate change is a very complex topic, and there are different types of careers for tackling climate change. You can, go about it from the perspective of technology and engineering, so you can go into career pathways where you look and do research on innovative technologies to fight climate change. You can talk about careers in policy or economics to understand the economics of different climate policy instruments, which can have different trade-offs. You can also look at it from the perspective of laws and regulations and public policy. And I don't think young people still have an awareness of all these different career pathways that they could take to establish a career dedicated to sustainability and fighting against climate change. So I think that would be very important.
Yeah, so you adding to sustainability does not mean that you need to be an expert in sustainability. There are, multiple fields that feeds into sustainability.
Exactly.
If you may, can I add on Anwar's point? So we mentioned a lot about raising awareness. I feel like in the youth right now, if anything, for the Saudi youth, they are more aware as a generation, and to the extent that it can increase climate anxiety. So when it comes to raising awareness, because the environmental sector is fairly new, and the youth are a fairly new generation that are aware of the environment, we should focus on other generations that have not had the chance or the privilege to know more about how urgent these actions and climate changes are happening right now.
Amazing. Before we close, sorry, we have a few minutes before we close. I have one final question that I wanted to ask you all, but allow me to just elaborate reflect on the points that you've mentioned. And this is something that we do in Fasil, which is the non-profit organization focusing on social enablement, community enablement, sorry. We work on four pillars, four general pillars. The first one is raising awareness. And for us, in order to maintain that awareness, we go to the second layer, which is capacity building, by providing the proper tools and skills for them to maintain that awareness and to bridge any gaps or challenges. The third element, we call it impactful networking. We have limitation in resources, we have limitations in the way that we could realize and implement positive impact in environmental sustainability. So that's why we need to establish an impactful network where we tap into others' entities and expertise into each other, so we can develop certain more impactful, more practical solutions. And finally, developing knowledge bases for us to feed into it all the knowledge that we adopted, and have a feedback loop that goes back to awareness, and also a channel for policy design and advocacy. My final question: from ambitions to action. This is the Saudi Green Initiative. What Saudi Green Initiative is about is taking Saudi Arabia's commitment when it comes to environment and sustainability into measurable actions. Today, we're talking about youth and youth's ambitions. How can we take youth's ambitions into action? This is an open question that anyone is welcome to answer.
So I can take a stab at this. I think the first is, do they have avenues in which their voices are being heard? And I think for us in the kingdom, where the majority of the population is younger than 35, we see a lot of decision makers that are young in public sector. We see them a lot in the private sector and then also in education. And so as this movement takes into place and becomes more mainstream into the Saudi discussions, I believe that this could be a key avenue in which young people's voices could then be heard on a more sustainable front within the future. Second is actually more involvement from the Saudi youth into the communities that exist today, and also creating their own communities, whether through their own social entrepreneurship or through their own NGO creation. And we have many programs today that focus on that. We know that MISC Foundation, for example, they focus a lot on actually starting your own NGO, and we see applicants coming in within that sector. We also have many universities that focus onto this sector as well. So really, for me, the ambition is, and I always tell this to a lot of the young people that talk to me, is like, what is the #1 skill that you would recommend? And I would say, honestly, be more proactive and actually initiate the change that you want to see. So the best way to predict the future is to do it yourself. And I think that's you becoming more involved and actually actively being a part of it is also important. So if I were to summarize, #1 is have the avenues in which young people's voices are being heard. Second is actively being involved within the communities that exist, or create your own.
Amazing. No, you have any other input, Najat or Anwar?
Yeah, actually, as you talked about actually working with the youth, I feel like we talked a lot about collaborations, especially with the Climate Week, but actually giving opportunity for the youth. Like in the King Khalid Foundation, they have this opportunity called the Green Grant, and it's an award to give youth to talk about their ideas and actually implement it. So initiatives such as that would be really helpful to actually have the youth work in the environmental sector and start their career further.
Amazing.
So not a lot of time left, but a quick comment. I would like to see even more empowerment of youth, and especially involving them in the decision-making process. Now, I'll come at this from a policy perspective, because that's what we do at CAPS, right? We look at energy, economic, environmental policy, and involving them in the process of the policy decisions that get made. I think that would be very valuable, giving the youth that voice and that connection to the decisions that are made at the highest level.
Amazing. Thank you very much for giving the time and sharing your thoughts. Please join me thanking my guests here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
العافية.
يعطيك العافية. يعطيك العافية. خليكم شوية.